Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Tales to Astonish 37, cover dated November of 1962. This issue marks the first and only appearance of obscure villain the Protector. The issue was written by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber, and drawn by Jack Kirby. Our issue opens up with a striking splash panel, teasing Ant-Man's coming battle with the wicked Protector. But before we can witness such an epic showdown, we must first travel to a jewelry store that has just been robbed. Its owner is an old man named Gerald Marsh, who's been attacked by an unknown assailant. He's already called the police, and one of their patrol cars is luckily arriving on the scene. Its loud siren can be heard throughout the block, including by several nearby ants. While no one suspects it, the tiny insects are actually part of a vast communication network that funnel crime alerts to the laboratory of Dr. Hank Pym. He's just learned about the trouble at the jewelry store, and being the hero he is, races to change into Ant-Man and help. Once he's ready, he simply inhales a shrinking gas and heads out to the city. Yet as tiny as he is, it's not as if he can just drive there. Instead, he's created a tiny passageway from which he can travel in and out of his laboratory. Inside is also a miniature cannon, which the crafty hero climbs into, and is powerfully shot out of. Its force takes him right to the jewelry store, where he safely lands on its awning. Rushing inside, Ant-Man greets Gerald and asks what's happened. The old man explains that he was beaten up by the mysterious criminal known as the Protector. Ant-Man doesn't recognize the name, so Gerald explains that he's a powerful extortionist who forces jewelers across the city to pay him protection money. The only reason that Ant-Man hasn't heard of him is because he's frightened all of the jewelers into silence. Gerald then recounts his encounter with the villain earlier that day, as he'd arrived to collect his weekly payment. But Gerald's store had been slow that week, and he didn't have the money to pay. This enraged the Protector, and he retaliated by using a disintegration gun to destroy a display case full of jewelry. But the villain claimed that this was just a sample of his power, and something even worse would come if he failed to pay again. He then knocked Gerald unconscious and left. When the jeweler awakened, he called the police, but ultimately decided against filing a complaint. That takes us back to now, as Ant-Man vows to defeat the villain, and then leaves to formulate a plan within his laboratory. But there's no cannon within the city to take him back, so he instead pulls out a tiny rope that he uses to hitch a ride onto the bumper of a passing car. When he reaches his laboratory, he begins patiently waiting for his ants to inform him of any jewelry store trouble. For 2 days there's nothing, until they suddenly spot the Protector extorting another jeweler. So Pym quickly changes into his Ant-Man costume and shoots himself back into the city. This time his fall is broken by a conveniently placed baby carriage. But once he's on the street he summons together a swarm of ants, and then rushes into the jewelry store. He's made it just in time, as the Protector is still collecting his payment. Ant-Man wastes no time in confronting the villain, but is actually just stalling, as his ants begin gnawing away at a string holding together a pearl necklace. As the Protector angrily approaches him, Ant-Man commands his allies to drop the necklace onto the floor. With its string weakened by the ants, the necklace shatters on impact, and sends its pearls flying across the room. Several of them end up underneath the Protector's feet, causing him to slip and fall. But Ant-Man doesn't want to destroy the jewelry store in their battle, so he goads the Protector into following him outside. But once the villain's out there, he notices a kid playing with a watered gun. He cleverly steals it and then blasts Ant-Man with a squirt of water. Seeing as he's so tiny, its force is like that of a crashing wave, and it nearly carries him down a sewer grate. But Ant-Man's luckily able to save himself by grabbing a hold of a nearby stick that's positioned perpendicular to the grate's bars. So he crawls his way back onto the street, but by that time the Protector has already fled. Ant-Man's only recourse is to return to his laboratory and think up another plan. And so he does, deciding that he'll use himself as bait to lure the Protector into a trap. Thus the issue shifts forward a week later, as Hank Pym is manning a jewelry store that he's rented. Just as he'd hoped, the Protector arrives to shake him down. Pym pretends that he doesn't recognize him, so the villain disintegrates a display case of jewelry and demands a weekly payment of $300, lest he destroy more. Pym feigns acceptance of the terms and then waits for the Protector to leave. But as soon as he does, he rushes to the back of the store and changes into Ant-Man. The shrunken hero then races after the Protector, but stops to inspect tiny droplets of machine oil, which had seemingly come from the villain himself. For now they're left unexplained, as Ant-Man then reveals that he'd ordered several of his ants to stealthily climb into the shoe of the Protector when he'd arrived. Courtesy of their signal-emitting antenna, and his receiving helmet, Ant-Man can now follow their trail right to him. So he heads off to do just that, and after an hour, tracks the villain to an old tenement building. But as soon as he enters it, he and several of his ants are suddenly sucked into a vacuum cleaner. Its wielder is the Protector, who'd seen the hero coming and had set up a trap. But the villain's ploy is not as clever as he'd thought, as he'd wrongly assumed that Ant-Man's strength is proportional to his size, when in reality, the hero retains the strength of a normal man. Thus he simply punches his way through the vacuum's paper waste bag and escapes. But the Protector doesn't notice, giving Ant-Man an opportunity to crawl up to a nearby fan. When the moment's right he activates it, and it blows a torrent of vacuum dust into the Protector's eyes. But before the villain has a chance to clear them, the police arrive to apprehend him, as Ant-Man had alerted them to his location before he'd arrived. Thus it's time to reveal who's under the Protector's mask. To the police's surprise, it's actually Gerald Marsh, who'd been wearing an elaborate exoskeleton to increase his size and strength. But Ant-Man had known this all along, as he'd seen through Gerald's helpless old demeanor, and had deduced that the drops of machine oil were from a mechanical suit. Even the villain's disintegration gun was a fake, as Ant-Man explains that all the weapon actually did was shoot out a thick cloud of smoke, one that masked Gerald as he quickly stole jewels and replaced them with heaps of sand. The issue subsequently ends as he tells the police to search Gerald's safe for the stolen gems, and then leaves before they start to wonder who he might be as well. That concludes the Ant-Man story in Tales to Astonish 37, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a fairly average and unremarkable story. Nothing about it was particularly memorable, and the twist ending was laughably obvious. There's some charm in its simplicity, but it honestly just wasn't that exciting. Admittedly, I can't point to anything being particularly bad about it, but perhaps that's only because I've already forgotten what happened. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.